We're going to invite onto stage someone that has done, I think, as many of these as I have. He regularly attends all of these events. He is the research director of Omdia. I'm sure you all know him. Please welcome Dario Talmesio onto the stage.
It's always great to be introduced by James because it makes you feel good before going on stage. Thank you, James. And also because he knows a lot about the MVNO market. So the task I was given today is let's recap where we are with the MVNO market, but especially let's have a look where we are going within the MVNO market. Now, I'm notoriously bad at keeping time, so I'm going to put my phone there. So let's recap where we are, where we're going. The MVNO market is pretty amazing in many ways. A, is packed with innovation, and B, keeps adding new market segments. If we go back 25 years, because believe it or not, this market is roughly 25 years old, you all remember it started off with the ethnic market. So now probably we wouldn't be calling it ethnic market anymore, but the international calling market, adding bit by bit new segments. Now, some of the old segments have faded or muted or transformed, but the reality is that we keep seeing this market adding new players. James mentioned 2,000 plus players. Maybe if we add the IoT MVNOs, we probably double that number. If we add those that are just roaming only, maybe we triple that number. We've lost count, basically, of how many MVNOs are out there. But let's keep the 2,000 mark as a reference. And of course, the past few years, the big phenomenon is, we have to be kind of transparent about our analysis, is telco operators fighting back in some ways, or rather, like recognizing that their customers are different and that monolithic approach they used to have to the market didn't work for everybody. So we saw the past 5 years a proliferation of sub-brands launched by telecom operators. I have a slide later on about that market segment. And of course, if we look at the second half of last year, all into this year, travel mobility. Travel mobility is probably the fastest growing segment, has been in the past few months, the fastest growing segment. All thanks to eSIM, for sure. All thanks to Apple in many ways, for sure. But all thanks to the fact that there is still an arbitration opportunity in roaming. And perhaps that arbitration opportunity is not just in roaming, but it's also in local markets. Not just arbitration, but possibility of doing something very clever, like one of the presenters later on will show. Now, I mentioned that we keep adding segments to the MVNO market. We are talking about a market of roughly 400 million customers, or leading up to 400 million customers, depending on the geography. Since most of you are here in the UK, we are talking about the 7 to 19 million size here, depending how you count it, because some people do not want to count the sub-brands as MVNOs, even though the setup is very much the MVNO. But it's a market that, A, is growing faster than the market of telecom operators in general. B, it's still a niche market. When you look at the MVNO market, in proportion to the overall market, we are still talking about a 3 to 4%. Some markets, the penetration is much higher. We can go as high as 20% in some markets. But generally speaking, and this is a gross generalization, but generally speaking, it's very difficult to find a market that exceeds the 15-20% mark. Normally, when the market of the MVNO developed so much, exceeding that number, we see the infrastructure telecom operators coming back, reacquiring some of those segments, either acquiring the MVNOs directly or introducing their B brands, which is one of the explanations why you see so many B brands in the market. Talking of which, this is the rough distribution of the B brand or the sub-brands, meaning telecom operators launching their own MVNOs in their local market. And this is one of the changes, abroad. So because we are now also seeing that as much as travel mobility is allowing new players to come into a market, we also see telecom operators launching their own eSIM-only proposition for travel, and as in effect, entering markets in which they do not operate their own network. That's quite a substantial change. By the way, the number of sub-brands has been increasing quite steadily. This is our count as of the end of 2024. We are counting 250 sub-brands, meaning 250 MVNOs run as a segmentation strategy by the mobile operators themselves. There has been this year a bit of rationalization in some markets. I mentioned the German market because it's one of those markets that is packed with mobile brands. But for instance, there are like 30 plus brands operated by telecom operators. So we always see that kind of expansion and rationalization of sub-brands in market. I think for those of you who remember the MVNO market going back many years, one key example of that strategy of having many brands and eventually reorganizing the brand portfolio was KPN back in the days where they had a big expansion and then a rationalization. That will always happen. Brands are living creatures, so it's normal that will happen. But I mentioned earlier on the eSIM market. So the fantastic opportunity that eSIM is bringing perhaps is very well understood by now, but the most important opportunity that the eSIM is bringing onto the MVNO market is access to a different class of customers. In the past, MVNOs were only or mainly able to sell onto value customers. Now MVNOs, thanks to the eSIM slot availability, slot between commas, they have access to the highest end of devices from the minute they leave the store, even before they leave the store, which is a complete different play for the MVNO market. Before, you as MVNOs were relegated into the low end. Now you can have a high-end place in the market, and it's really adding not only a potential customer base, but a lot of revenues for many of you. As we know, travel mobility is the main segment for eSIM. There are still, in many ways, the eSIM market is still slightly disappointing. I don't know how many of you use it, but I think we can all agree that it could be made easier for the average customer. And those who make it easy show that the results are there. I'm thinking about the one I use regularly, but you can relate to it if you will. The reality is that there is still work to be done in the user experience of eSIM in the majority of cases, simply because not all customers will be able to go into the settings of their mobile phones. I shouldn't, but I always call my mom in calls and say, like, okay, install this eSIM before you come to London. And she starts panicking. So don't do that. Or do it if you want to have a laugh. But the point is, some segment of the markets don't really work well on eSIM. Nonetheless, it's opening up a lot of market potential. James earlier on mentioned Revolut. Just in 6 months since they launched last year, or half year when they launched, they managed to attract. And this was when the proposition was still travel mobility. They managed to attract 600,000 customers in record time. The fintech, as I mentioned earlier on in my slide, is the segment of 2024, 2025 in the MVNO market. We're going to see a lot more, but let's consider it established. And now we know that the fintech is the new market segment for MVNOs, as it is the energy sector, as it is many others. But there are like new ways of doing MVNOs and new segments potentially coming on board. And quite rightly, if you think about eSIM effectively digitizing the customer journey, and you map it against other trends that are not necessarily in the telecom industry, but in the wider industry, such as social commerce, such as agentic commerce, what does that all lead into? It leads into the fact that maybe the next, well, not maybe, but surely the next wave of MVNOs is going to be coming from celebrity in the social media space. They just need a few, not so simple, but a few tweaks to really monetize the million of customers that they have and turn it into subscribers of mobile services, as well as many other services. The examples are already there. Do you all know this guy? No? Yeah. Who knows him? Yeah. If you don't follow him, do, because I love him. He's a technology reviewer, and he's quite amazing. I think he's a bit Apple biased, if I can say it. But imagine with his 20 million followers, he brought to market a proposition where, you know, you have the best of any network, or similar to what we already see in the market, but really pushed by a technology-related celebrity. That will make a difference. Of course, all telecom operators work with influencers, but there is a case, and it is at the moment, where influencers want to have their own white label services in market rather than working on sponsorship. There are different models, but it's definitely happening, and we see it happening more and more. So next year, we're probably going to see more celebrity wireless, but not the celebrity, kind of the TV celebrity that we all know. It's more kind of social commerce type of celebrity. Which, by the way, brings a lot of questions onto the table for MVNOs, MNOs, MVNEs, aggregators, which, and talking about infrastructure here, where does the aggregation happen? Who is hosting the MVNE if celebrities are going to become MVNOs themselves? Is Instagram buying their MVNE infrastructure and getting into deals with telecom operators? Or is there any other aggregator that can work in a similar fashion? But it's something to think about in terms of where is the enablement going to happen? What are the possibilities of real change in the market structure? It's not just the celebrity. The celebrity, there are many, but there is a potential for really seeing a dramatic change in the structural setup of the infrastructure chain in the MVNE market. But one thing to think about, since we are talking about the future, is that normally as an MVNO, today you buy your connectivity from your mobile operator. And some telecom operators, or we have just said that travel mobility is the most important segment of the market today. Well, travel mobility gives you coverage abroad, gives you coverage everywhere. Now, is it maybe time to think about that there are other wholesalers coming into the mobile market, such as Starlink, such as AWS, and others? So is it the case of thinking maybe your aggregation should not just be limited to mobile networks or fixed line networks, but you want to create a global MVNO proposition. Something to think about, but certainly something to investigate for the future. Another aspect that I think the MVNO industry needs to think about is what we could call maybe two-sided business model or the platform business model for MVNOs or for MNOs or for telecom, which is API. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but just to make it super simple, essentially is you sell connectivity to your customers, but you can also have an opportunity of selling services to the other side of the market, which is in many ways customer information services, such as identity verification and et cetera, et cetera. Now, one of the slight problems of the of the API market is that telecom operators have visibility of their own customers, the ones that are sitting on their own core network, but they don't have visibility of the MVNO customers. So that's a missing part of the puzzle that MVNOs can monetize. And this is, again, talking about changes in the structure of this market. Normally, as an MVNO, you buy from your wholesale operator. But maybe we can see a case in which you also sell back wholesale services, which are API, to your aggregators, which could be the telecom operators themselves, but most likely a higher level of aggregation. So again, an area to think about, because in some markets it's extremely important. The reason why I bring in these topics that are relatively at the skirt of kind of the outside the traditional MVNO discussion is because those are the topics that are likely to radically change the MVNO business as we know it. It won't be next year, but surely something to start thinking about as you start, let's say, strategizing for your next macro business opportunity or for the evolution of your business in the long-term future. Finally, I know half of you are from the UK, so I wanted to have something that is specifically UK related, and it links back to what I mentioned earlier on. Brands are living creatures, living entities, and they change, they are very dynamic. Sometimes I hear people saying, well, the MVNO market in the UK is so saturated, what's the point for me to try in the UK market? And I think, yes, it is true. It's a very saturated market, but it's also a market that moves a lot. Don't blame me for this. I just collected some Trustpilot rating for, and I know many of you have, 8,000 of you have already seen this because I posted it on LinkedIn. But the reality is that the market potential is there for those companies that have the right proposition. The market, the consumer market keeps moving. It's not a steady one. And at the end of the day, even those networks that are fantastic sometimes have a different positioning for their customers. So the market is still very much open, even though we have penetration rates that are incredibly high. So with that, I would conclude and thank you very much. And if you have any question, I'm very happy to take it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dario. I'm going to ask the first question, which is the question that everyone always asks me in the lunch break, which is, can people have access to the slides?
Yes, they can.
Perfect. So there we go. We've got that one sorted out. That one always comes up. Do we have any questions for Dario from the audience? Put your hand up if you have any questions. Don't be shy.
You need to kick off.
Yeah, I might have to construct a question. There we go. Thank you. You've helped me out enormously. Let me run down to you.
Hi, you touched upon APIs at the tail end of that. Is there a risk that MVNO customers become almost, don't get the same ability to access the best-in-class anti-fraud services that MNOs are engaging with banks in when selling their APIs? if they aren't able to sell through those APIs, they're not able to offer the SIM-swap APIs, the number verify APIs, and what we're seeing is banks putting lots of time and effort into improving security for customers, but those on an MVNO contract where data doesn't get through don't have access to those.
Very valid point. I tend to look at, I did mention the other side, as in the monetization opportunity for MVNOs to sell back APIs into a wholesale. But the risk is real. If you see how age verification is moving, for instance, some customers, the MNO customers today, are able to go through age verification, just to name one. Yeah? But the anti-fraud are probably the most critical one. There is definitely a risk. The MNO's customers will have a much better environment than the MVNO ones, simply because the APIs are not available to the application developers, the APIs of those customers sitting on an MVNO core network, let's say, or billing system. So I agree, and it's only growing. So I think it's in the news. Oh, I mean, it's definitely been abundantly in the news. Australia is about to bring in a ban for, I guess, 14 years old, 16 years old and below on using social media. Age verification for certain content is coming everywhere. Anti-fraud, we know it's the #1 critical priority for pretty much every business. So absolutely, there is a need to integrate the MVNOs into the API business. Yeah. Thank you for asking that. Yeah.
Okay, we have a second question. Let me just run over.
It's not a question, maybe one addition to the API topic. I think, yes, MVNO needs to be also part of this API business, but I think it's not a question that MNOs are not including them. The API, I think we're in a very special situation because the telco industry is not competing to each other, because we all need to get involved in it, because there are other solutions which are not MNO or telco based, and there's a competition between the network APIs from the telco players and the solutions from the OTT players. And if we want that the network APIs from the telco players become a success, it's the MNOs who needs to be engaged, but also the MVNOs. And I think we all have an interest that we are ready and that we can serve the market, because the customers, like a bank, he will only get or take the network APIs if there's a certain coverage in the market. So this includes more than one MNO being active and also the MVNOs being active, because they have the data that is needed, the customer data, for example, for Know Your Customer, for SIM swap, for number verify, etc. So therefore, I think it's really, there's not a competition between the MNOs and the MVNOs regarding APIs. It's more like we need a collaborative approach in order to compete against the other solutions which are also out there.
Fair point. Yes, it's API market is one of those markets that brings you all in harmony, in theory, as in you all work towards the same goal, as you say. Of course, the competition of let's say verification is sometimes also internal a little bit. So there are part of this business that needs to be sorted, but we don't. I was not suggesting that we see the tension between telecom operators and their MVNO host. It's quite the opposite. I'm saying that there is an opportunity to work together and sell back in some ways. Yeah.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question. Perfect. Thank you, Andy.
Andy from Honest Mobile. You talked a little bit about maybe the next wave of MVNOs coming from technology, social media influencers, and the way that eSIMs opened up the premium end of the market to MVNOs. How do you see that playing out with some of the sort of gatekeeping of premium features from the big networks, like a visual voicemail on iOS or things like that?
Can you elaborate on the term gatekeeping?
The big networks keep the good stuff for themselves. So how's a YouTuber going to launch a mobile network without visual voicemail, without Apple SIM swap, without Apple Watch?
Okay. In my view, the good thing about the MVNO market and why it's so successful is because in the places where it tends to be successful, like the UK market, is mainly based on direct negotiations between MVNOs and MNOs. I know there's often a little bit of friction between the two, but in reality is that when an MNO has a partner with the right proposition, they don't hold back, and vice versa. So I would say yes, wholesale, certain aspects of wholesale are regulated, but generally speaking, markets like the UK that we rate as one of the most successful MVNO markets tend to work on those bases of negotiation. And we believe it's when you can remove regulation, that is a success for everybody. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, we've pretty much come in on time, which is unusual, I think. But thank you very much, Dario, for some really insightful stuff. If you can all show your appreciation for Dario. Keep hold of that.